It's the part of the show that I really want to delve deeper into some different issues that might be affecting you. And one particular issue that I keep hearing about, reading about, and actually quite irritates me a little bit is the cladding scandal. It's something that I do feel strongly about. And over the next half hour, we'll take a closer look into the issue. And each week, I'm planning to pick a topic that we can explore in a lot more detail. Now, this week actually marked the 4th anniversary of the Grenfell Tower fire. More than 72 people lost their lives. The Grenfell Tower building was wrapped in what we now know was unsafe cladding. And since then, the government has set out to remove this dangerous stuff from buildings. However, it is still estimated that 700,000 people are still living in buildings that are wrapped in inflammable materials. And more shocking than that, some leaseholders are now having to pay the price for this cladding to be removed. We're joined by Antonio Roncolato. He's a survivor of Grenfell Tower, and also joined by Rebecca Long-Bailey, Labour MP for Salford, who's part of the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign group. Thanks for joining me, both of you. Welcome to the programme. Now, let's start with Antonio.
Thank you.
Now, this must be really difficult for you, of course, because it's the 4th anniversary of the fire, and I can't even believe that it happened that long ago. I mean, we're still talking about it, and still nothing seems to be resolved. Can you take me back to what happened that day?
Well, 4 years ago, obviously, I was asleep, and my son, on the way back from work, he called me, telling me that the tower was burning, and that the fire was already up to the last floor, basically. I tried to get out. Very difficult. Thick smoke outside the landings on my floor. Very hot, thick. You could not breathe. And so basically then I stayed in there in my flat. I was told to stay put by the firefighters and the 999 when I called. And after basically almost 5 hours, I was finally rescued by 2 firefighters.
Wow. So you actually stayed put. You did what you were told. I mean, we now know that because of the way the building was wrapped in this cladding, that would have been the wrong advice. But had it been protected in the right way, that would have been the right advice. Whilst you were staying put for those 5 hours, what were you thinking?
Well, more than thinking, I was thinking. I said to myself, I cannot make any mistakes, or one mistake could cost my life, basically. And I tried to keep vigilant. I tried to keep busy by removing the smoke. Basically, it sounds a little bit funny, but that's what I was trying to do, because my flat locked with smoke very quickly. And the smoke came through the brand new windows, just newly installed, from the ledges next to the base of the window, basically. And so basically, I tried to create some draft by opening one window facing east and one window facing south in my bedroom, and closing the doors in between in the corridor, and and with towels, trying to to create a draft in order to get rid of the smoke. And I managed to do that. So likely, I was constantly vigilant and checking what to do, not to do. Obviously, I was in touch with my son on the outside, with the firefighters as well, that they, in a couple of occasions, told me to stay put. And you can imagine, I was very busy, but I felt like being trapped in a place like a cat in a cage, basically.
Wow, I mean, that must have been so frightening. What floor were you on?
I was on the 10th floor.
I mean, and when the firefighters finally came, what happened? Did you hear them? Did they knock on the door? What happened? How did they know you were specifically in that flat?
Yes, the thing is that I was told to stay put, and I obeyed. Also, I was informed by my son that the fire was all over the places, but not on the side of the flat or the building where I was living. So, but at one stage, at around 5:45, I saw some fire crawling down on the outside of a window, my son's bedroom window. And at that stage, I got a little bit scared, obviously, and smoke started to come in as well. So I called my son, Christopher, and I told him, that I needed to speak urgently with a firefighter, a marshal, one with a white helmet. And I said, you have to run to one of them and get him on the phone to me. So Christopher did that. He ran over to to a firefighter, and I explained to him very clearly, I've been told to stay put. I tried to escape twice. I couldn't. It was too dangerous and too frightening. And then he said, "Okay, which floor are you?" I said, "I'm on the 10th floor, flat number 72." And then he exchanged a few words with someone else, and then he said, "Okay, somebody's going to be there in a few minutes. Just be ready." I said, "I've been ready for the last 5 hours." So and then and they came actually. So they knocked at the door. I opened. I got ready. I was already prepared, basically, with my rucksack, with the passport, with important documents that I had, and they explained to me how we would go downstairs, and I understood properly. And so then we left the flat, and within 2 or 3 minutes maximum, we were downstairs, because I knew obviously the fire stairs very well. I was totally blind, in the sense that I had a wet towel on top of my head, and I was just hanging on the back of a jacket from the firefighter, and another firefighters were behind me, and I was helping myself with my elbow touching the handrail going downstairs, and so basically very quickly we reached the bottom of the tower, and I say thank you to them, and then two policemen, I think, they escorted me out with a shield on top of my head, and then the nightmare was over.
I mean, really, seriously, the fire service, so brave, excuse me, to go into that building in any way, and very frightening for you to get out of there. Thank God you got out there. And since you've been, since the fire, have you had good support, and what kind of support have they given you?
Well, in the beginning, there was very, very little support, to be honest. The support came from the volunteers, from the local community. It was a big mess. In all honesty, it was a big mess. But, as time went by, then, yes, we got a key worker. And I was very lucky to have a couple of very, very good key workers. And I still have one that is helping me tremendously, me and my son. And but a lot of other residents that have lost loved ones were very much in distress. Not everybody has been, in a way, as lucky and fortunate as I have been. So, I consider myself very fortunate. Many others,
Well,
they
yeah.
lost loved ones. They have
You,
very much
you,
open wounds. So it's
you're
very
very,
tough.
very, very fortunate to get out of that tower. I mean, I watched it on TV and thought it just looked horrific, and I was worried that anyone could actually get out alive, and I'm so glad that you did get out there. Now, your thoughts then, as we later discovered that the problem really was caused a lot by the cladding. Obviously, there were other issues with the building, but your thoughts on the cladding, that was one of the main factors for that fire.
Well, you see, once you live in a block of tower like this, and you see that refurbishment is being done. Okay, we created a group of residents called Compact, and we raised some issues that we wanted to be looked into, and we exposed our problems, and but they were not listened. Nobody listened to us. They listened, but they just the council, the TMO, the company that was in charge of the refurbishment, Rydon, they watered it down. They said, we were troublemakers. We were just not representing everybody. They said that we were just a minority, and but we had really big issues on the table that we wanted to help them, to help us in a way. You know what I mean? So that was all ignored at the end of the day, and look what happened. So unfortunately, and the point is, that when we were very much into looking at the safety of our homes at home, in our flats, but very, very, I mean, maybe no one would have thought, okay, is the cladding not flammable? Is it really safe? Is it really supposed to be there? So we didn't know that. So we
Well,
wouldn't
you
not have
wouldn't.
thought about that.
Yeah, it's not
Who would
something
have?
that...
So
Who would have thought of that it was that? I mean, as we later discover it was that. Well, listen, Antonio, your story is incredible. Just stay with us, because also joining me now is Labour MP Rebecca Long-Bailey. She's been heavily campaigning for those living in buildings with unsafe cladding as part of the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign. She joins me now. Rebecca, welcome to the programme. Oh, there you are. Wonderful. Rebecca, now, thank you for joining me, Rebecca. Let's have a chat with Rebecca. Tell me about this End Our Cladding Scandal campaign. What are they calling the government to do?
Well, they're calling for the government to essentially fund the necessary works that are required to make buildings safe, because 4 years on from the Grenfell tragedy, as you said earlier, there are hundreds of thousands of residents still living in unsafe building. And the works are being held up, firstly, because there was never really an urgent national strategy set out by government. It's also being held out up because people are struggling to access the funding that's required to carry out those safety works on buildings. And the government's approach to that funding and who pays for this crisis, if you like, is littered with injustice, and it's actually delaying the urgent works that need to be carried out. Now, many leaseholders, for example, I mean, we've got at least 14 blocks that have approached me in Salford, for example, have already received requests or details about the payments that they could be facing. And, there are examples of some residents being asked to pay up to £100,000 per flat. Now, the situation is so bad, Salford's not alone in this. The Bank of England has recognised that there's such a risk to the economy overall that they're assessing whether Britain's building safety scandal could cause a new financial crisis, because how many people who own their own flat are sitting on a spare £100,000? And should they have to pay for this in the first instance? Because these homeowners weren't responsible for these crises. It's those who built the buildings were, and those who signed them off. So those leaseholders and residents shouldn't be forced to pay for it. And the fact is that most can't. And there's quite a poignant quote that the End Our Cladding Scandal campaign set out in the kind of blurb on their website. And it said, the fear of bankruptcy is one thing, and that's faced by many people across the country at the moment, but that's nothing compared to the terror that residents face every night when they have to sleep in a flat that they know just isn't safe. This is a national scandal, and the government has to treat it as such. And I don't think for the last 4 years they've been anywhere near giving it the treatment that it deserves.
Well, it seems an absolute disgrace that the people are expected to pay any part of that, actually, and it actually makes it quite cross. I'll bring in my panel. I've got Nicola Thorpe and Ella Whelan also there. I mean, Rebecca's there. I mean, if you've got any questions for her regarding this cladding.
Yeah, well, I mean, the important point is that it's not just about cladding. So some of these costs that leaseholders are facing, part of the government fund that has already been promised, and Rebecca and the Labour Party have been quite good on pushing this, relates simply to cladding. Part of the problem is the costs also cover other fire safety measures, from small things like putting an alarm to very big things like looking at insulation. Lots of these blocks were built with faults and regulations that were missed and not put to at the time. So it's actually about not just sort of minor retrofits and minor changes, but huge changes to some of these buildings. There's also specifications in relation to the funding of what size the block is. People are essentially being screwed over on a whole number of things. And there's this sort of consensus that, leaseholders, Rebecca mentioned, there's this sort of idea that leaseholders have thousands of pounds in their pockets. I mean, there's been stories of people in cities who have had to put their parents' pension on the line. There are young people who have bought first homes who are facing bankruptcy. The question is not just that the government should pay for it, but also that the contractors and the companies that built these blocks in the first place, knowing that they were cutting corners. I mean, the scandal of Grenfell was not just that there was a tragedy and that a fire broke out, but that, as Antonio mentioned, it could have been prevented, that the residents knew there were problems in the first place. Part of the scandal was that the heat that had built up in the actual tower blocks because of the summer night and the way in which the windows had been fit and the windows were open, that none of those fire safety regulations kicked in. And that has been replicated across tower blocks. So are they going to make the contractors pay? Is the government going to pay? What's going to happen?
Somebody's got to pay for it, and it shouldn't be the leaseholders at all. Rebecca, I'm just wondering, the government have offered some level of support, though, haven't they? Is it 18 feet or something if your building is more than that or less than that? What kind of measures have the government actually offered?
Well, it's a bit of a mess. I mean, because even the National Housing Federation has said that basically the government should be forward funding all of the work so that it can be carried out as quickly as possible, and then taking the legal action to recover as much as possible from those that are responsible. But instead, what the government came up with was a building safety fund, which at the minute has 5 billion in it. Now, the estimated cost of actually carrying out the necessary works is 15 billion. Well, that building safety fund is only accessible to buildings that are over 18 metres high. And as has been said, it actually only relates to cladding, but 70% of the buildings that have been surveyed so far actually have non-cladding fire safety defects. So if you're in a building of 18 metres or more and you've got non-cladding fire safety defects, then forget the building safety fund, you're just going to have to pay for it yourself. The second element of the government scheme, if you're in a building that's under 11 metres high, you can't access the building safety fund. And in your situation, you'll be able to apply for a loan. But again, you can only apply for a loan for cladding, and the government hasn't actually published details of what the loan scheme is and who can actually apply for it. And then the other element of the government support is completely silent on all of the costs that relate to interim measures like waking watches. A lot of these buildings are so unsafe that they have to have a person going up and down the floors every few hours just to check that everything's okay, and that costs a lot of money, and residents are currently having to pay for that out of their own pocket, as is the case with increased insurance premiums, and none of that is factored into the government's plan at all. So it really is a mess. And what I have to say is that this isn't a party-specific issue. There are MPs right across the political spectrum, in the same way there are people right across the country who just find it morally reprehensible that residents and leaseholders, those who own their own home or rent their own home, are potentially being asked to foot the bill for a crisis they didn't cause. And I think the government has got to change its approach, and they have to do it very, very quickly.
Well, listen, Rebecca, you're staying with us for a bit, aren't you? I'm going to have a brief chat with Antonio and find out. Antonio, how are you faring now? Are you well? Are things going okay for you now since this?
Yes, but the problem is that since especially the phase 2 of the inquiry started, so many people have been called to go to the stand and answer questions that the QC would ask them at the inquiry, and so many. The truth is coming out basically. So many companies, so many regulation at fault, and none of those people sitting at that stand, they trying to say, I'm sorry, we did something wrong. It was totally inadequate. We didn't check. It didn't comply. It was misleading. I'm devastated. None of them, except maybe for a couple. And then there is another big thing that, we have to point our fingers at. And it is very, very important, which is the fire risk assessment that any of those, especially buildings built in the 60s, in the 70s, they need thorough fire risk assessment. The one that Grenfell had, and the assessor, Carl Stokes, that did the risk assessment for so many years, did a total mess. He had no idea how many disabled people were living in the tower. He never bothered to ask. And he was saying at the inquiry that, TMO should have told me how many people with difficulties, mobility difficulties are in the tower. And another thing is that what caused a lot of problem in Grenfell, and it's really makes my blood boil. It is that the ventilation system was not working at all, and it was not working for years. And this gentleman knew about it. He reported it. TMO didn't do anything about it. And then they came up with some sort of saying that, it has been upgraded or something. And basically, had the ventilation system worked that night, how many more lives, apart from the cladding, how many more lives would have been saved? Firefighters would have had a clearer way to go up, in going up the stairs. I could have gone out at 1:40 the moment I was walking up. No, but I tried twice, but it was smoke locked. It was impossible. Had the system worked properly, meaning the fire risk assessment had it been done properly and correctly and thoroughly, we would,
We wouldn't,
the
yeah.
ventilation would have been there to absorb and to expel the smoke.
Well, Antonio, listen,
This is, to me, it's unbelievable. People got out of there by miracle, and many other died I stepped on the way down. I stepped on a body, on a dead person.
Oh my
Can you
goodness.
imagine?
That's
And
awful.
all
Listen,
this is, I didn't know that, but apart from the
Antonio?
cladding, all this came out from the inquiry now, only last week.
Well, listen, Antonio, it's just listening to your story is really harrowing, and I'm so glad you joined us. And thank you so much for telling us your story. We appreciate that. It's really awful what happened, but I'm so glad you got out there. We're also joined by Rebecca Long-Bailey. She'll stay with us now. My thoughts are, of course, with you and anyone who's been affected by the Grenfell fire. Good evening, it's Tonight Live with me, Nana Akua. Welcome back, where have you been? We're still continuing our conversation on cladding. It's a crisis, of course, and John's been in touch to say the biggest scandal in this entire nightmare is the fact that the cladding should never have been put on the buildings at any stage whatsoever, and still should never be added to any building. Listen, feel free, if you've got any questions about this, to get in touch. We've got Rebecca Long-Bailey here, and we'd love to hear your thoughts as well. Tweet us at GBNews, or you can send us your thoughts at gbviews@gbnews.uk, or why not find us on Facebook, search for GB News. Now, as I said, still with me, Rebecca Long-Bailey, Labour MP for Salford. She's been campaigning strongly for those affected by the cost who have to pay for the cladding to be removed. But also with me is Jenny Garrett, who moved into her apartment block as a leaseholder in 2019 and is now having to pay for unsafe cladding to be removed. Welcome to the show. What an absolute scandal. It's ridiculous. Jenny, first of all, did you know when you how long ago did you purchase the property, or or move into this property?
So I bought my flat when I was 22 years old. So it was April 2019, so just over 2 years ago now. I'm now 24. It was the proudest day of my life when I bought my property. I was so proud of myself. I'd graduated from uni. I'd saved really, really hard through the age of about 15, saving every penny I could. And yeah, less than 2 years on, at the same time of the onset of the pandemic, I found out that I was potentially on the hook for tens of thousands of pounds to fix issues that were made to my building when I was actually 11 years old.
I mean, it's just astonishing. And so what kind of correspondence have you had from, is it from your leaseholder that gets in touch with you, or is it actually your management company? What kind of conversations have they been having to you with regard to this?
So the initial communications we had it was literally around the same time that the COVID pandemic started. So it was March 2020. So I had, the stress that everybody was going through with the world turning upside down. And I basically had a letter to say that the cladding on our building was not the same type as on the Grenfell Tower, but was essentially equally dangerous. And that we would be on the hook to pay for that. And we were served what's called a Section 20 notice, which basically advises you that there is going to be a cost of at least £250 to each leaseholder, which doesn't sound like very much, but the issue is that we had no idea how much above £250 it would be. And the more and more I kind of looked into the problem and got in touch with the campaigners and all the other leaseholders in this position, the more I found that, the cost of fixing the problems in my flat just to me could be up to 50% of the value of my whole property.
Unbelievable. I mean, it really is unbelievable. I'm going to ask Rebecca, so what are you proposing that the government do then to sort of fix this mess?
So, I mean, this exemplifies the problem right across the country, is that people, quite often, as is this case, they've bought their first home, they've done everything that was asked of them, they've tried to get on the property ladder, they don't have any spare cash to set out on repairs and remediation works, and certainly no spare cash to deal with defects that weren't their responsibility in the first place. And the problem is that a lot of those people who are going to be asked to pay these sums, and there are going to be exorbitant sums in some cases, as I mentioned, the one Salford case where it's £100,000 per apartment. What happens when those people can't pay for it? They can't sell their flat because they're in negative equity and their flat's devalued, so they're trapped. So the only option then to get the money is for the freeholder to then take legal action against that apartment owner, which could take years, and potentially, force them out of their home, force them to declare bankruptcy just to get the money to carry out those works. All the while, you've got years and years going by when those remediation works aren't taking place on that property, and the whole block of apartments is living in fear and in unsafe conditions. And that's not morally acceptable. It's not morally acceptable that residents should have to pay because it's not their fault. It's the fault of the developers and those who signed off the schemes in the first place. But it's also not fair that they should live in those buildings whilst this pantomime takes place, when the simple option is for the government to pay for the works to be carried out, and then the government pursues, in collaboration with the freeholders and leaseholders if need be, pursues legal actions against those developers and contractors who actually carried out the works in the first place.
And you're the group that you're with that are trying to prevent the leaseholders and owners of these properties from paying for this. How are they pushing the government to make these changes?
So they're doing all sorts of things. I mean, they've been in touch with every single MP they can possibly get hold of. And as I say, there's a lot of support in Parliament for this. We just need to encourage the government to get on board, because even some of their own backbench MPs support the campaign. They've been projecting films onto the side of Parliament showing the experiences of residents who are living in these unsafe buildings. They've been sharing statistics that are quite harrowing, that show that many leaseholders are in that much of a state mentally with what's happening, both in terms of fears for their safety, but fears for their own financial future, that some are considering suicide, some are self-harming, and it's very, very worrying. So they're sharing those statistics to try and show that this just isn't about finance. It's not about who's morally, best placed to pay for this issue. It's having an enormous effect on the mental and physical health of those people who are affected by it.
Well, I mean, it is horrendous. Rebecca, remind us again of the group that you're working with to try and prevent this cladding, if anybody's listening or watching and wants to get in touch.
So there's a brilliant group called End Our Cladding Scandal. And they've got a website that details everything that they're doing campaign-wise and their asks of government. There's another group called the UK Cladding Action Group, which is another fantastic group that have been helping myself and other MPs. And if there's anybody in the Northwest, there's a brilliant group called Manchester Gladiators, who have been advising leaseholders and residents who are experiencing this and telling them how to approach things from a legal perspective.
Well, listen, Rebecca, thank you so much for taking time out to talk to us. And Jenny, I wish you all the best with that awful situation
Nana.
that you're in. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Now, we did ask the government for a statement tonight as to why some leaseholders are having to pay for unsafe cladding to be removed. And a spokesman from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government told GBNews, "We understand that many people are worried. We're protecting those in buildings between 11 and 18 metres from affordable costs, ensuring no leaseholder will pay more than £50 a month to remove unsafe cladding. This is on top of the more than £5 billion to fully fund the replacement of the unsafe cladding in the highest risk buildings. And we have been clear throughout that owners should make buildings safe without passing on costs to leaseholders, and we will ensure they pay for the mistakes of the past with a new levy and a tax to contribute to the costs of cladding replacement." So that's what the government told us. We've got that statement there, and this is how it shapes up. So at least something appears to be happening, but I just hope that those who are going through this can get some support and help.